Welcome to Shujin Academy VGM Club. I'm Professor Tom, your faculty sponsor. Today's opening track is Lesson Course from Mario Golf Advance Tour, composed by VGM legend Motoi Sakuraba. Most of us think of Sakuraba for his work on RPG franchises like Star Ocean and the Tales games, but he's also the go-to composer for the Mario Golf games. When I'm browsing websites looking for game soundtracks for the show, I'll always give golf soundtracks a try. For whatever reason, there's just a fun, chill vibe that composers bring to golf games that you don't always get in other types of sports. Although tennis is close, maybe I should do an episode devoted to tennis games someday. I started Shujin Academy VGM Club with a golf game episode that I called On the Green, and for my 48th episode, I went back to golf with an episode that was logically titled Back on the Green, and for today's 65th episode, we'll be doing a third set of golf songs that I've named Revenge on the Green, because I find the juxtaposition of golf and revenge to be hilarious. There are a ton of songs on today's playlist, and we're going to start off by hearing from one of the multiple games to carry the name of golfing legend Jack Nicklaus, who was nicknamed the Golden Bear for his tendency to occasionally transform into a glowing amber werebear and eat other players on the golf course. The game is Jack Nicklaus Turbo Golf for the TurboGrafx-CD, and it encapsulates the upbeat jazzy sound of CD-ROM golf games from the 90s. The music for this game is credited to Advanced Communication Company, which is only a minor step up from Unknown Composer. Our second song is On the Green from Japan Pro Golf Tour 64 for the ill-fated 64 Double D disc add-on for the Nintendo 64. It was composed by the mysterious Kei Shinzawa, who has no other composition credits that I could find. This game is a celebration of Japan's rich golfing culture, which dates back to the Japanese invasion of neighboring Scotland in 1273 AD, and between that and the factoid about Jack Nicklaus turning into a bear, I think I'm having some issues with the truth today. The third stroke takes us to the Game Gear for BGM-01 from Super Golf, a game with an unknown composer and a fun little soundtrack that I've featured before, and I'm not going to say any more about it because there are 10 songs in this music block, and I don't want to talk for an hour. Fourth up, it's Touroku from Powerful Golf for the Nintendo DS, a game spun off from Konami's Power Pros series of baseball games featuring adorable little characters. I am completely unsure who composed this, as it was not released outside of Japan, and I only found the song name by doing a YouTube search in Japanese, but it's a good soundtrack worth a listen. Putting our golf cart into fifth gear, we'll hear Main Theme from PGA European Tour for the Super NES, composed by Steve Kirk and possibly Christian Dana Perry. It's hard to be certain because the credits for this game only have an entry for Sound and Music, and because Perry is also credited as a producer, and his career seems to be mostly focused on game production and sound design instead of composition. This game is a spin-off from the sprawling PGA Tour series from Electronic Arts, which started in 1990 and became one of those yearly EA Sports releases until they finished beating the dead horse in 2015. For our sixth hole, we visit the storied course at Pebble Beach with a song called 01 from Bandai Golf Challenge Pebble Beach on the NES, composed by Akihito Hayashi. I know this game best from its distinctive cover art, which has a very late 80s aesthetic. Look it up to see what I mean. Song 7 sees us revisiting True Swing Golf for the Nintendo DS with Menu 02 from composer Katsumi Yokokawa. I played a different golfy song from this soundtrack on my last golf episode, and I also played a very non-golfy song from it on episode 51 because this soundtrack is quite good even when it doesn't sound like a regular golf game. We derive our 8th song from Namco Open, a Super Famicom game that did not see release outside of Japan. The song is called Namcot Course, which is probably derived from Namcot, which was the brand name that Namco used for a lot of its home console releases. It is virtually impossible to find information about this game online, so instead of going with unknown as the composer, I'm going to credit this one to Bigfoot and move on. The front 9 finishes up with Tutorial from Valora Valley Golf for the Saturn, composed by the queen of golf game soundtracks herself, Yumi Satake. This is a renamed port of T&E Soft's new 3D golf simulation Devil's Course, and while those games typically found their way to the North American market branded as the True Golf Classics franchise, they dropped it for this specific title. Finally in the block, we'll hear the generically titled Golf Course from the Irem Skins game for the Super NES. Several of the developers involved with this game left Irem and founded Nazca, gifting the world with Neo Geo Golf Classic Neo Turf Masters, but unlike that game, the Irem Skins game was composed by the team of Yasuhiro Kawakami, Hiroshi Kimura, and someone known only as Taniyama. Those are all the songs we'll hear in this block. Let's tee off and hit a long drive down the fairway. those songs were Track 08 from Jack Nicklaus Turbo Golf, On the Green from Japan Pro Golf Tour 64, BGM 01 from Super Golf, Touroku from Powerful Golf, Main Theme from the Super Nintendo version of PGA European Tour, 01 from Bandai Golf Challenge Pebble Beach, Menu 02 from True Swing Golf, Namcot Course from Namco Open, Tutorial from Valora Valley Golf, and finally, Golf Course from the Irem Skins game. Our second block starts with an enchanting par 4 hole at Coconut Palm Garden. At least, that's the name of the song. It comes from Birdie Try, which is an arcade title from 1988 that was fairly challenging to research. Music for this one is credited to the Data East sound team, which is not exactly precise, but it's a fun golf track nonetheless. The second song takes us back to Pebble Beach with Opening from Pebble Beach Golf Links for the PC-98, another composition from VGM Golf Empress Yumi Satake, possibly with help from Shigekazu Kamaki. I honestly don't think you can talk about Golf VGM without mentioning Satake somehow. She is the composer most associated with golf games, thanks to her long tenure at TNE Soft. Speaking of revisitation, we're seeing Jack Nicklaus again with our third song, which is Track 1 from Jack Nicklaus's Greatest 18 Holes of Major Championship Golf for the NES. There's not much to this soundtrack. This is basically the only song for the whole game. Although there is no credited composer, Konami developed this game, and the music does have a very golfish take on the Konami NES sound, so I'm going to credit the Konami Kukeha Club and leave it at that. As we drive our golf cart ever onward, we stop at the Dreamcast for a song from Netu Golf. The people credited for sound on this one are Hiroaki Yoshida, Masaaki Iwasaki, and Shinichi Yamazaki, although none of them are explicitly named as a composer. Iwasaki has been featured on the show multiple times before, and I'm glad to see his name come up once again on one of the Dreamcast's 10 best golf games. Chi-Chi Rodríguez may be the best-known Puerto Rican golfer, and he lent his name to the Genesis game Chi-Chi's Pro Challenge Golf, which was known in Japan as Top Pro Golf 2. We'll hear the simply named 02 from this game, which was composed by Masahito Miyamoto. There were a number of CD-based golf games during the 16-bit era, probably because the golf market is considered upscale, and the CD-ROM add-ons for those consoles tended to be expensive. If you adjust for inflation, the Sega CD would cost about $700 today. But that money would be well spent, because if you had a Sega CD, you could import Dynamic Country Club, and in addition to full-motion video clips, and having the choice of 8 beautiful women to provide caddy service, you'd also get to enjoy songs like Menu, which is the 6th song we'll hear in the block. No details on the composer for this one, so I'm just gonna say it was done by the Loch Ness Monster. Fred Couples is known for being the first American player to achieve the #1 slot in the official world golf ranking, and for being the oldest player to make the cut at the prestigious Masters tournament, and also for lending his name to 2 video games. We'll hear from Fred Couples Golf for the Game Gear as our 7th song. The track is named BGM 05, and the rip I have credits Yoko Wada as the composer, but I don't think that's right, because Fred Couples Golf looks to have been developed by a Western team, and Wada was based in Japan. I guess you really can't trust everything you see on the internet. Way back in 1992, Sega called its first polygonal racer Virtua Racing, and they continued to slap the Virtua name onto a bunch of polygonal games afterwards. Golf was no exception. In 2001, Virtua Golf was released for the Naomi arcade platform. This game was also called Dynamic Golf, which may or may not be related to the Dynamic Country Club we heard from earlier, and it was composed by the team of Tetsuya Kawauchi, Masanori Takeuchi, and Eriko Sakurai, and we'll hear from it for the 8th song in the block. Okamoto Ayako is a household name among households that paid a lot of attention to ladies pro golf in Japan in the 80s and 90s, and she was popular enough to lend her name to multiple video games. One of these is Super Famicom title Okamoto Ayako to Match Play Golf, which brings us the 9th song we'll hear in the block. It's called Match Play, and it was composed by Doto Ando, who did a lot of composition work early in his career before transitioning into sound effects work, particularly on bullet hell shooters. For the final song in the second block, Yumi Satake will once again grace us with her royal presence. We'll hear from yet another Pebble Beach Golf Links title, this time for your Panasonic 3DO interactive multiplayer. The song is called Settings, and it is exactly the kind of smooth jam that we've come to know and love from CD-ROM golf. Listen to these songs now, and try not to land in any water hazards or sand traps. Those songs were Coconut Palm Garden from Birdie Try, Opening from Pebble Beach Golf Links for the PC-98, Track 1 from Jack Nicklaus' Greatest 18 Holes of Major Championship Golf for the NES, Track 03 from Netu Golf, Track 02 from Chi-Chi's Pro Challenge, Menu from Dynamic Country Club for the Sega CD, BGM 05 from Fred Couples Golf, and Track 12 from Virtua Golf. Time for a word from our sponsor. When you business, it's important number go up. To excel in today's fast-paced economy, you need the power of Landolt Consulting. Landolt Consultants will help you leverage synergies to optimize managerial outcomes. Their proprietary blockchain-based AI technologies will help you create actionable organizational insights to manipulate consumers in vulnerable markets and reach new heights of capitalist excess. So remember, if you want your company to drain value from humanity like a vampire squid, turn to Landolt Consulting, where innovation meets exploitation. Heading on to the back nine, we've got our third music block, which doesn't actually make sense because the back nine is half of the holes on a golf course and this is the third of 3 music blocks, but I like torturing metaphors, so that's what we're doing. I had a Nintendo 64 Double D song in the first block and a 3DO song in the second block, and we'll start off the third block with a song from yet another underheard platform, the Sega 32X. The song is known far and wide as Music Test 00, and it's from Golf Magazine Presents 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples, which may be the longest title that's ever appeared on the show. It's definitely the best golf game for the 32X, as it's the only golf game for the 32X, and its soundtrack does have some gems like this one. Composers for this game are Ron Saltmarsh and Andy Warr, and although they only have a dozen game credits between them, they still turned in some golf tunes that jam right down the fairway. Moving from a system that had only one golf game to a system that had 10,000 golf games, we'll next hear My Room from Super Swing Golf for the Wii. Composer credits for this one are a bit challenging, since Super Swing Golf was a pseudo-port of a Korean golf MMO called Pangya, and several of the credited individuals don't seem to be composers at all, so let's just go with Shigekiyo Okuda and Yutaka Fujishima, who are the people that the Game Ripper credited. Do you remember Spike McFang? He was the vampiric star of a Super Nintendo platformer called The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang, and developer Naxat really wanted him to be a mascot like Mario or Sonic, although he landed somewhere below Bubsy and Croc. As a part of this campaign, Naxat made a golf game where Spike and his supporting cast play golf. Outside. In the sunshine. The bright sunshine, where vampires love to play. The song we'll hear is called Desert because vampires love desert sunshine even more than regular sunshine, and it's from composer Hisashi Matsushita. At Augusta National Golf Club, the fourth hole is known as Flowering Crab Apple, and our fourth song in the block takes us to the legendary course with Sete from Masters Harakanaru Augusta 3 on the Saturn. This is yet another Yumi Satake composition, with a little help from Takeshi Miura, and its smooth, chill vibe is like enjoying a nice spring afternoon in Georgia. Song Roman numeral V in the block takes us back to the Super Nintendo, with Main Theme from PGA Tour 96. As with the song we heard from PGA European Tour in the first block, this one was composed by Steve Kirk and Christian Dana Perry, and it's really crazy to look through the PGA Tour series that EA did and see how many games they did for so many platforms. The penultimate song in the block takes us to the Game Boy Advance and a game called Kurohige no Golf Shiyoyo. This portable golf game is based on Pop-Up Pirate, a game for young children where you take turns putting swords into a barrel until a pirate jumps out, so it combines both golf and piracy. It's also one of the few polygonal games on the Game Boy Advance. The song we'll hear is BGM 07, and it was created by an unknown composer that still sails the high seas to this day. Finally, we'll finish our day on the links with track 15 from St. Andrews, Aiku Toreshi no Old Course for the Super Famicom, a game that simulates playing on the oldest golf course in the world. This game uses an isometric perspective, which is often seen on mini-golf games, but rarely used for maxi-golf, and its soundtrack comes from Haruhiko Kuroiwa. Now that we've landed on the green, let's try to sink this putt. Those songs were Music Test 00 from Golf Magazine presents 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples, My Room from Super Swing Golf, Desert from Super Naxat Open, Sete from Masters Harakanaru Augusta 3 for the Saturn, Main Theme from PGA Tour 96 on the SNES, BGM 07 from Kurohige no Golf Shiyoyo, and finally, Track 15 from St. Andrews, Aiko Toreshi no Old Course on the Super Famicom. That's the show. If you want to reach me, I'm most active on Blue Sky as shujinacademy.bsky.social. You can also find me on Threads, Facebook, and Instagram as Shujin Academy VGM Club. Episodes of the show are posted to my YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for Shujin Academy VGM Club. Other links are on my linktree at linktr.ee/Shujin Academy. Please leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're finding this episode. New episodes are released once or twice a month, depending on how often I get them done, and they premiere on Thursday mornings on your favorite podcatcher and 8beats.co, the internet's #1 game music radio station. My show is also featured on TerraPlayer, the cool app that's a destination for gaming podcasts and other content, so you can check me out there. Finally, if you just can't get enough of me, I'm also voicing esports reporter Samson Escapades on audio drama How Much in Bison Dollars, which you can find on FGC Radio and RSS.com. If you're listening on Spotify, please be aware that they've pulled a few of my episodes before. There's a non-zero chance that they'll eventually pull my entire podcast, as they've done with a few other game music podcasts, so I'd strongly suggest you subscribe elsewhere to be sure you can get all the Professor Tom goodness you crave. Special thanks for this episode goes out to fellow VGM podcaster Jameson of Bar Silence Podcast for contributing cover art. You can and should find Bar Silence wherever you download podcasts, and check out his website at barsilence.com. I've got one more song to play us out, and it's from a game that explores golf in the future. It'll be Cruising from Mecha Robot Golf for the Super Nintendo, and that game is about a robot playing golf to prove that robots can do anything that humans can do, which feels like the opposite of how that story usually goes. It was composed by the team of Michiharu Hasuya, Osamu Kasai, and Takashi Surutani, and apparently the original Japanese version is just a normal golf game with no robots, so maybe this is an incident where the localization added something to the game. Thank you for listening. I'm Professor Tom, and I'll see you next time on Shujin Academy VGM Club.